Next, we're going to have a look at the ideas that the ancients had on their own myths. Greeks were not just passive readers or listeners to their own mythic stories. They had ideas about them and tried to figure out themselves what myth was all about. We started with some early ideas in this course about myth, looking at the contemporary English word myth and the many contradictory and interestingly contradictory ideas that are contained in it. Well, this story gets even richer when we look back over time and have a look at what the ancients thought about their own mythic stories. After this video, we're going to move forward and have a look at things from the Renaissance and forward, but here we'll look at what those in antiquity thought about their own mythic tales. We'll find that the views are not uniform, that they're very different, and we'll have lots of different voices represented. Starting off with an anonymous ancient manuscript commentator, someone who scribbled in the margins of the myth that he was reading. This one had to do with something that we'll spend some time talking about, a myth that had some nasty things happening, gods having sexual relations in public, and this anonymous manuscript commentator writes in the side of the manuscript, among some people, these things are not permitted on account of the display of indecency. Yes, indeed, it's true. Censorship as an attitude toward these mythic stories is alive and well. Some of the ancient commentators are very scrupulous about what should be told and what shouldn't be told, and there are some decency police that are operative here that want to make sure the stories that get retold are cleaned up a bit, as our commentator wants to make sure of here. Another figure, Plato, whose dates are 429 to 347 BCE, a great philosopher in the Western tradition, had many complex views about ancient myth and about the poets that retell these myths. Most of them were not so easy to take because Plato was not a friend of the poets. In his Republic, he has lots of different commentaries that develop some of his ideas, and here's one I wanted to pull out for our class. Such utterances are both impious and false. They are furthermore harmful to those who hear them. For every man will be lenient with his own misdeeds if he is convinced that such are and were the actions of the gods. Plato's once again making a commentary on the same thing our anonymous manuscript commentator made a comment on, talking about gods having sexual relations in public. And he says, well, goodness, we can't go around doing this. But notice that Plato's criticism is a little bit more trenchant than the one that's given by the manuscript commentator. That earlier one was only about decency and indecency and I guess worried about being scandalized by some nasty things happening. Plato instead focuses on the deleterious effect that hearing such stories is going to have on people as they are building values in their culture. So here, myths are not just something that you listen to and get entertained by or even offended by. They're powerful. They actually shape the kind of person you are and the kind of values you have. According to Plato, then, we've got another idea, which is that myths have the power to construct culture. Myths have the power to construct culture. Another figure that predates Plato is Xenophanes of Colophon, known for many colorful views, some of them having to do with myth, wrote in the 6th to 5th century BCE and told us this little piece of wisdom. Mortals consider that the gods are born and that they have clothes and speech and bodies like their own. The Ethiopians say that their gods are snub-nosed and black, the Thracians that theirs have light blue eyes and red hair. But if cattle and horses or lions had hands or were able to draw, horses would draw the forms of their gods like horses, cattle like cattle. Xenophanes has a pretty sophisticated view here, so unless we quick thought that all these ancients walked around believing their own myths, well, goodness no. Xenophanes has quite a skeptical view. He's skeptical of the kinds of shapes that the poets give to the gods and having the gods anthropomorphized and walking around in shapes that seem like ours. Furthermore, he adds, what's happening here in these mythic stories is that all we're doing as Greeks is reflecting back in our gods what we see in ourselves. We make our mythic stories based on the kinds of cultural values that we hold. And if we had ethnic differences, such as he observes in the Ethiopians or the Thracians, we would make our mythic stories according to a reflection of what the ethnic and specific ethnic qualities are that we have associated with us. And this would happen true, too, even across species. So, according to Xenophanes, culture actually constructs myth. Culture plays a powerful shaping role on the kinds of myths that people tell each other. We're inverting an observation from Plato. Putting the two of those together, we've got a pretty powerful reciprocal relationship and observation in our hands. Having a look at another theory, a figure named Metrodorus of Lampsacus, who's lived in the 5th century BCE. Not a very well-known person, but some of his ideas are preserved by later people that comment, that quote his work. And one of his famous quotations survives here: "Neither Hera nor Athena nor Zeus are the things which those who consecrate temples and walls to them consider them to be, but they are manifestations of nature and arrangements of the elements." Agamemnon is air, Achilles is the sun, Helen is the earth, and Paris the air. Hector is the moon, but among the gods Demeter is the liver, Dionysus is the spleen, and Apollo the bile. So Metrodorus looks at these stories and says, you know, what's happening on the surface as one god talks to a human, or a human talks to a god, or a god talks to a god, it's not as though we've got some divinities floating around engaging in conversations with others or engaged in actual physical action. Instead, what we have are representations of deep truths, symbolically carrying forward deep hidden wisdom. And look at the kind of mapping that Metrodorus makes when he talks about the code that's underlying this hidden wisdom. All the human beings in the stories that he's interested in, this drawing from Homer's Iliad, we've got Agamemnon, who's related to the air, Achilles the sun, Helen the earth, Paris the air, Hector the moon. So all of these humans are related to specific pieces of the natural physical cosmos. Furthermore, the relationships between humans and pieces of the cosmos doesn't have to be one-to-one. Agamemnon is air, and Paris, also at the same time, is air. So the relationships can be multiple, from figures to features of the cosmos. And then when we look at the gods, well, look at what the gods are mapped onto. Their deep hidden meanings, their symbolic representations of, is body parts. Demeter's the liver, Dionysus the spleen, and Apollo the bile. So maybe was he suggesting that when we tell stories about human beings, what we're really doing is reflecting deep truths about some features of the physical cosmos around us. And when we tell stories about gods, what we're really doing is reflecting deep ideas we have about our human nature. Fascinating idea. We don't have Metrodorus around to ask him. I wish we had more we could read of him. Instead, we have just these little snippets. So looking at Metrodorus's view of the world, this is a very famous school of ancient ideas about myth called allegory. Metrodorus and many others were convinced of the idea that myths carried deep hidden truths. Those who did can be fit under the school of ancient allegory, and when they ran into mythic stories, they said to themselves, okay, the surface level must be a code for some hidden deeper truths. And all kinds of stories or all kinds of meanings get discovered and found in these mythic stories. Stories about the physical cosmos and its shape, about the weather, about morality, all kinds of hidden wisdom were thought to be contained in these rich, powerful texts, especially of Homer. Ancient readers loved to read Homer allegorically and find deep hidden truths in them. Now, all of this hunting around for hidden meanings can sometimes get to be annoying, right? Because a person can say, oh, look, this is a hidden meaning here, and this is a hidden meaning here. And you don't usually bring the author back to say, did you intend this or didn't you? And at a certain point, there are some people that developed a kind of anti-allegorical strategy. Aristarchus of Samothrace is one of those figures. His dates are 216 to 144 BCE. He's a very sober commentator, a more scholarly type of person, interested in a literary approach to the mythic tales. And he told us a view that was captured by a later commentator that summarized his views this way. Aristarchus thought that readers of the myths ought not to take things told by the poet, ought to take the things told by the poet as more like legends, according to poetic license, and not bother themselves about what is outside the things told by the poet. So Aristarchus is saying, just take a step back from trying to find all these deep hidden truths in there. Instead, what you're going to see is a story that Because of poetic license, poets like to tell exaggerated representations of things, but don't go around looking for bunches of hidden wisdom in there. So Aristarchus gives us a view that we would characterize as something that is literary and pretty strongly anti-allegorical. Finally, among our ancient views, I wanted to take a look at a figure named Euhemerus. His dates are the 4th to the 3rd century BCE, and here's another example of a summary of ideas in a later author. Nothing survives except small quotations of Euhemerus, and this summary helps us get a grip on him. The gods, we are told, were terrestrial beings who gained immortal honor and fame because of their gifts to humanity. Regarding these gods, many and varied accounts have been handed down by the writers of history and mythology. So Euhemerus had the view that the stories that we hear are actually based on real historical characters. These stories of historical characters get told and retold over time until they're literally deified. They become gods in the retelling, and this is where the myths come from. Real historical personages are the background behind any of the mythic characters we have. As time advances, Euhemerism and allegory are the two most prominent theories that survive. We'll see through the Middle Ages, and then in our next segment we'll look at what happens in the Renaissance and beyond as people try to get a grip on these strange, wonderful stories. But through the Middle Ages, allegory and Euhemerism are the ideas that really have the most weight.